might not know me, my name's Scott. I'm a primary school teacher, but I wear many hats, as you can see here. I also run the readerteacher.com if you're looking for book recommendations, and I'm host of Primary School Book Club as well, which I think you've heard about. I'm going to talk a bit about you today about kind of raising readers in schools, but also looking at it from a school angle, because I'm a primary school teacher and I've kind of revolutionized reading in my school. The way I've done it, I think, really is through thinking of these 5 things. And obviously research shows that reading makes just not only a big difference to a child's educational achievement, but it's also to their personal, social and emotional development too. And I think really you have to think more about the child as a whole, when you're thinking about reading as well. And I think these 5 things really, for me, are the biggest things you can do, obviously with the reader children at the heart of it. But I think because I put it into this diagram too, and I think if you think about the reader children being the heart of it, but then the impact then on being a reader teacher, the reader leaders of the school, then being turning into a reading school, and then the influence and the impact of that then being a reading community, it stretches far and wide really across the basis of everything. And I think if you keep these 5 things in mind, this forms the foundation for me as being a reader, kind of a reading whole entity really. And you'll kind of see these sort of logos throughout as we go throughout the presentation, and each of my slides kind of links to either one or more than one of these, because they all sort of link and impact and influence each other. So this is the first one. I think knowing your children as readers for me is huge. And I think if we're starting with that reader children as being the heart of the things, then you have to know your children. And I always think of these 2 questions. Do you know your children when you have them in class? But then do you know them as readers? And I think if you know them as readers, then you know them more than just knowing them as people as well. Because what often makes them readers is what makes them tick. And one of the first things I do when meeting my new class is to give them a reading survey. And that really provides me a snapshot of how the children in my class view their reading, but it also provides me with kind of honest and revealing answers and responses. And it sort of kind of provides more than just a snapshot, because you get an insight into their access to reading. And there may be children in your class that have lots of access to them. You may have books at home or opportunities to go to local libraries. But then again, you may have children who don't have these opportunities or don't have books in school or books at home, sorry. I think I read a statistic just recently that said 1 in 8 children don't have books at home. And that is stark. And I think as teachers, we have to be kind of aware of both sides of the reading coin in that respect. And I think it really helps the teacher as well to get a really good insight if you haven't taught the children before, if they're new to your school. And I know that in my school, because we've had many children, we were a growing school to start with, and we had many children move into the area, and we had no sort of initial basis or foundation for these children. And this kind of survey or this insight provided that snapshot for me. And I kind of knew a bit about them before they started. And I used this as a transition time activity. And I think that helped me be proactive for September then, because I was already putting things into place based on their reading interests. And I think something you can do as well, just as an added extra, is to use this as a basis to survey your staff as well, to find out their confidence of children's literature. And we'll talk a bit more about kind of teachers' knowledge of children's literature too. Reading aloud, as Ross has just expertly spoken about, is for me the first step in forming that foundation for building that reading culture in your school. And I kind of think that reading aloud is kind of the be all and end all really, because it's never too early to start reading aloud to children. I can remember myself as a child, I was fortunate. I had adults, significant adults reading to me daily basis out loud. And I think that sort of internalization of language has really helped me as a reader push forward. I heard Ross then talk about words and feeling words in your mouth. And that sort of sense of hearing those words may be the first time that readers have heard this language. And when they get that sort of experience, that is it. That is kind of the first, like I've said, the first step in that sharing those stories together, hearing that language, feeling the book rather than just hearing it. And I really kind of want to build emphasis on using nonfiction as well in the classroom to read aloud. Is something that we don't really consider. We like reading fiction, we like reading stories, but there is now a wide range of nonfiction books that are glorious to read in the classroom. And I think protecting that time as well to read aloud in the classroom and making the time, allotting the time to read in the class. I tend to do it reading takes place every day in my classroom, and at least for a period of 20 minutes in a single sit. And I think this is more than adequate for sharing that, but also talking about the book as well. And that kind of leads me into this as well with pupil choice. And if you choose your class book together, I think this helps stimulate interest as well. And this is sort of, for me, as building reading children, this piques their interest. If you pique their interest in something, and they have this sense of ownership and choosing and collectively choosing that choice as well, it may raise up some sort of objections if their book loses. But I definitely think that putting the ownership and putting the power into children's hands is significant in getting reading, well, revitalized in your school as well. But also having that time to talk as well about books. It's all well and good reading books and giving children the opportunities to see books and hear books, but let's talk about books as well. And this is something I avidly recommend teachers using in their classrooms, and purposefully and purposely planning the time to talk in your classrooms. If you do this, then the discussion sort of enhances the book. It brings it to life. And I think that the discussions that they get from it aids their debating skills too. But it also kind of allows them to challenge opinions and to say they dislike books as well as like books. And that's where preferences come to the forefront. But you've got to almost make this time and protect it, as I've said, because we all live busy lives and we teach congested curriculums. As well, I think that in our schools as well, I try as much as I can to provide a range of reading in class. And this goes in my classroom collections, but also providing that wider access to books in a school library, and also thinking about books for everyone. So we've got things like staff libraries in our staff rooms, and they're not just children's books either, they're adult books too. And there's a big one down the bottom that says a school librarian too. And me being a former librarian as well, I didn't work in a school, I worked in public libraries, but I know the value of a librarian. And for me and my school, maybe we're fortunate in the respect that I can act as both and straddle both roles because I've got that experience. But for some, I know that organizing books and having that expertise is really vitally important, and it can be hard to come by. And I think the value of a good school librarian is essential, it's invaluable. And if you can have that expertise, even just for a short time, or even just to help out, that would be something to get the ball rolling in your school. And I know Cressida Cowell is hugely, massively behind a campaign at the moment that is pushing for not just school libraries, but also the people to work in them as well. And I really, really hope that it succeeds. I think as well, to really push an emphasis on reading within your school as well, particularly for children. It's all kind of good speaking about it, kind of ingraining it and hoping it comes across indirectly, but you've got to think directly about reading too. And if you can make reading visible, then this is huge. If you can project displays and things on walls, windows, think about your classroom and think about the ways that you can kind of portray reading positively in your classroom. Can you use displays? Can you use tables? Can you use other means? Like I was a big fan of using windowsills to display books because children often don't find books on windowsills and they're intrigued, they're accessible, they're at their height for them. And that helps them then go and engage and touch, and the books become more tactile for them as well. I've also talked about displays, but you can also think about doors, staircases, and even things like murals, which bring books larger than life to them. It's obviously going to stand out to them. They're going to be intrigued. They're going to be curious. They're going to be passionately curious. They're going to wonder what that is, why it's there. And they're going to want to do something about it. And hopefully they want to read them. But I don't only think it's just making reading visible in school as well. It's about sort of the culture, the ingrainedness in your school. And we rely heavily on sort of online communities. And through the pandemic, we have as well with our online classrooms. And I think if you can make that book chat happen online as well, then that massively helps, because things like this, using recommendations on Padlet, really kind of interested different children, maybe children that wouldn't have been so forthcoming in projecting something or adding something to a display in class, but they were quite happy to type it up or to portray it in a different sort of format. And they absolutely love this. And this is a great way of sharing, because this is peer-to-peer recommendations. And I think if a teacher can make teacher-to-child recommendation, great. But it's the children-to-children recommendations that are absolute gold standard. And I think if we can do that more often, then those reading children start to blossom into reading classrooms and reading schools, which I'll also talk about a bit more. And this is kind of an author wall, which you can add on paper as well. Don't forget that the communication between authors and writers and illustrators and poets too can happen on paper. And if you put that up onto a display and add to it, constantly, regularly add to it, then that helps as well bring reading to life too. Something I like to talk about really for kind of reading children and reading teachers is book clubs. I've had massive success in book clubs. I absolutely adore running book clubs. They're a passion of mine. And I would often run a year 3 and 4 book club to start with, because we were a growing school. Kind of our numbers in what we call foundation phase, which is Key Stage 1 and early years, weren't that many. So we didn't take it up for our younger children, but for year 3 and 4, I started in September for the autumn term, and then for the spring term, I did year 5 and 6, and then I joined them both then to make a summer term. So I was kind of running book clubs all the time, and the passion that these children got from the book clubs that I had, well, you can see here, it's just tantamount. And it's also about that engagement with the authors as well. Book clubs don't run in isolation. They're not solitary. They do have that sort of communication element with the authors. And I'll also add more about that as well too. Then I kind of build up onto the next layer of reader teachers. And my biggest tip, as I said here, for all teachers new and experienced in the profession, is to read yourself. For me, I didn't know my classes as well as I could without reading myself. And now book recommendations, books, just they reverberate around my classroom. I literally can't stop the discussion, not that I would want to, but I just absolutely adore it. And I really think that not only should you think about kind of just reading, I think you should consider, as I put down here, that you should consider your reading identity as a reader yourself. And that means as a reader from a child to now, how that might have changed. As a reader teacher, so what you hope to achieve in the classroom through books, but then as a teacher of reading too. And this is not all these things that I'm talking about. And the one crux that I haven't mentioned really is what for me is kind of one of the biggest barriers to reading for pleasure in one way, is not being able to read. And I think a teacher reader is a teacher of reading in the respect that we teach phonics, and we teach decoding, and we teach the skills of reading. And I think if you consider those 3 elements and triangulate those, then I think you've kind of onto a winner, and you've really considered everything you can about you as a reader and sort of the biases and the influences that you bring, but then how you kind of endorse that in the classroom, and then how you actually teach the skill of reading too. I can't go without plugging my website either. And I think that as a reader teacher, this is why I named my website The Reader Teacher as well. And I think I always kind of promote and ask teachers if they can just to visit it, just to keep an update of what books are out there and to hopefully find the best books that they can use in it. And I've got things like recommended reading lists for each year group, book match, similar suggestions. So if your children or you like the same like books in a popular author or a popular series, then what to read next, and my monthly must-reads, which I publish every month, including a fiction, non-fiction and picture book every month. Also, Primary School Book Club, I've put this up as a reader teacher and reader community because I think we all we don't read in isolation. Reading is a social experience. And I think having that reading community helps as well. And if you can, then join with us in Primary School Book Club. I am the host of it. It is a monthly book club chat and vote where we vote for a book to read every month. So we are keeping on top of recent reads. And our read this month is Lightning Falls by Amy Wilson. Reader leaders, I also think having your senior leadership team is a massive step in getting reading for pleasure and the enjoyment of reading to children in your school. And here's some of the ways that I think your leaders can be seen as readers in your school. And I don't just mean head teacher, deputy head teacher, assistant head teacher. I also mean members of senior leadership team reading leads, but also teachers that are more experienced and can help early career teachers or newly qualified teachers as well. And develop that as well. And things like taking reading assemblies and becoming lost in the moment of sharing stories together. Everybody can do that, whether you're a teacher in the early infancy of your career or experienced. Everybody can do that just to show that you are leading reading in your school. It's not a case of just being a leader in the name of being a leader. I put here about promoting book recommendations through newsletters. And this is what our school did really, really well. We got our head teacher and deputy head teacher involved too. And there were plans really to push this across the board into helping and getting kind of support staff involved as well. But unfortunately, we couldn't because of the pandemic, which fell out at the most inconvenient of times, as everybody knows. But we really want to show that reading happens to everybody in our school. And if you can get everybody on board, then reading can be seen as a team effort. And I think that is massive. That is really significant. And we also did a Christmas one as well, which I think was nice. Then I think if you pushed on from reading children to reading teachers, to reading leaders, to reading schools, this is where you're kind of building and building and building. And for me, if you can build a reading environment with an ethos and engagement and an energy that extends beyond that reading corner, because I think some of us are, I know I was early on in my career quite sort of rigid in my way of using a book corner. And that was because of what I've learned or what I've experienced. And we want to take that book corner and promote that ethos right over into the heart of our classrooms, and then transform that into the reading classrooms, into our reading schools. And I think if we can get bigger and bigger and bigger like that, then that's where it snowballs. And that's where the effects are most significant. I think if you have a book-based curriculum, and I know in my class, especially, and across the school, we're keen to use books wherever we can. And you can see a range of experiences here. I probably am most proud of the artwork, because I'm not the most arty of people, but I absolutely adored William Grill's book, Shackleton's Journey. And we used the cover to think about rotational symmetry and art, which I think couldn't combine maths and art in a better way, really. And we all took on the role of each of the crew, and we added that sort of individuality to our design as well. And another one is the history with Hilary Robinson's books that we focused on to commemorate the centenary of World War I. And we ended up FaceTiming her then to show the work across year 3, 4, 5, and 6, which was a fantastic way of bringing the key stage together. Author visits, I'm massive on author visits. This really shows that you are thinking about how you can project reading across the school. But I don't only think that author visits are key. I think you've got to think kind of what authors you want to consider. And this is where you think about representation in your school and how children see themselves, not only in books and people, but across the board as well. And you want to think about how you can get author visits in for the very young children, as well as the oldest as well. Working with writers as well, I've had great success working with authors. They are so keen to work with schools and even just to communicate with schools. And social media has been an absolute fantastic tool to use. I've used schemes like Book Pen Pals, which is here, and working with Ashley Hardy. The Book Pen Pal scheme is a scheme where they also send you recommendations of books that they like to share with you on postcards, and you kind of communicate back with authors of your own recommendations or what you thought of the books. And like I've put here, the social media chats we've had with authors, my children have won books, they've engaged with authors, their experiences, as I put here, have changed forever. And I think if you can create those lasting connections between those authors that create the books and the children they create them for, that is, well, that is linking what we're all about, really. A massive thing that we've done is Patron of Reading, and our Patron of Reading was Eloise Williams. And I think building up that Patron of Reading is a deeper way of doing it. It's not just working with authors, it's about having a deep personal attachment with an author. And if you can get an author local to you, I really, really suggest this, because not only do they show reading and what they've done, but they become an integral part of your school as well. And Eloise, not only has she done workshops with each class, and she was an actress, so she's done drama things with them, as well as reading, writing. But we've also included her in our newsletters as well. So that's another way to push out to parents too. But she's also come in and helped us with our Eisteddfod, which is our annual Welsh celebration, and awarded the certificates, and crowned our Bard, which is our winning poet. And she's also written joint stories with our book clubs as well, which was fantastic because they could see the process of editing and how to write too. And she also opened our school library as well. So she did become this integral part of our school and known to all the children by name. And lucky for us as well, she progressed in her role and she ended up becoming our inaugural Children's Laureate Wales, which was fantastic for our school because we had the launch at our school and we worked with these organisations. And we even got our school on our national news station as well, which was phenomenal. And that really pushed our kind of focus of reading in our school and the profile of reading nationwide, which I couldn't have ever envisaged. And you can see the effects that she had on our school right here with some of the notes and some of the thank yous that she had, and children reading her books avidly on the way home from school even. They literally were so buzzed up. There was such a buzz about reading in our school thanks to her. I think families are fundamental too. Some of the pictures, I don't know why they're not showing, but there's a picture down the bottom too. But I think if you can engage families, because parents and families are the key to, they're often children's first experience of reading. And I think if you can get them on board as well, and purposely plan for events that engage them as well, and think about how sometimes reading can polarize, or they may have polarized experiences of reading, and try and break down those boundaries and break down those barriers that they might have. And I think if you can sort of form a partnership with families, then you're onto a winner, a really big winner. Local libraries, I won't go without saying it, because I'm more onto sort of building the reading community now, if you can see the kind of little icons that I've got. With local libraries, I think I'm a massive proponent of libraries. I always have been. I worked in libraries for about 6 or 7 years before and during my teacher training. And they are sort of the foundation for pushing that reading out into the community. And we always like to get involved with our local library, whether it's summer reading challenge, competitions they run, like designing their library cards, or just visiting the library. Our school, we are really, really fortunate that our local library is less probably than 500 yards away. And we make regular weekly visits. Each class would go over at least once a month. So every class is going over weekly in the term, in their half term. And we would try and sign up all our children as well, because if you give them the access, then it kind of removes that barrier of going into their library or trying to find out their local library. And another way of kind of projecting the influence of the library as well is to endorse the library and advertise the library in school as well. Their opening times, not just the reading that's on offer, but the activities they've got on offer too. I think this might be my last slide. Hay Festival, we are so fortunate as well, where we're located, that we can go and visit Hay Festival. Every year we take our Key Stage 2 there on an annual school trip. We get 3 or 4 coaches, I think now we're up to, and engaging in events like these provide additional exciting and unparalleled opportunities. And children would never normally experience these. I think I've seen 1 or 2 of my children there in the following week when I'm up there myself. But to have, I think it's approximately, what are we up to now, 100, 180 children, something like that we take. They're going in one go and seeing a range of authors, range of illustrators, meeting them as well. So they get that personal experience as well. I couldn't think of anything better as a school trip for us to do. And we're so fortunate that as well, that during the pandemic, the digital player has been on offer free to schools, and schools as well, not just in Wales, can access this as well. So if you are looking for something to sort of entertain as well as educate children as well through an author experience, then use this, because Hay has a winter weekend coming up, I think in November, where authors like Emma Carroll are taking part. And I definitely advocate using this. And these are just some of the experiences that they've had. Wow. And I feel like I've talked about a million miles an hour, but I had to get through all that.
You're amazing, Scott. Thank you so very much. I think what we'll try and do, we'll try and get Emily back online. Can we try, Emily?
My name is Emily Weston, if you don't know who I am, and my handle on Twitter is @PrimaryTeachEW. And luckily, I don't think I'm going to cross over too much with a lot of the things that Scott has said. So hopefully it's some new information for you. I've been teaching, this is my 8th year now. I've done predominantly year 6. So I've been in year 6 for 5 years. And I've also done year 3 and I've done year 4. And last year, I actually worked in a secondary school as an English teacher with year 7 as well. I did transition between primary and secondary, but the subject that I was given to teach was English, which I think has really built on my knowledge of reading in classrooms as well, because I've seen a different world really of how to teach, and it's really embedded some new ways of teaching for me. So for me, I think reading for pleasure is what underpins reading within the classroom. So I'm very much echoing what Scott has said. If you don't have children that want to read rather than feel they need to read, you're not going to build up that love of reading, but more importantly, you're not going to have that filter down through their curriculum subjects either. So a slight caveat before I get started, there are things that I would not advocate, which is what I would say not to do within this. However, I do understand that there are certain things that schools will ask you to do or you're expected to do. So it's just obviously bearing that in mind as you go throughout. So for me, I think reading for pleasure is based around not reading for external rewards, that all reading is encouraged, that books need to represent the class, recommendations and book talk become a normal part of classroom life, and reading is not seen as a punishment. So I'll go through each of those in a little bit more detail, and as I said, hopefully not overlap with Scott too much. I think for me, why I've put it first as well, the most important thing within the classroom is that children have to want to read, not feel that they need to or want the actual rewards on offer. I think quite often in schools, they earn stamps or stickers, or they earn, I've seen even chocolate bars and sweets. And I think that can be a motivator for certain children, but it's not motivating them to build that enjoyment. It's just motivating them to pick up a book, which can make reading seen as a chore or a job. And this is where the reading as a punishment comes in. I think if they see that they have to read to get a tick, or, you know, one school I previously worked at, the first year I was there, children had to read at break time if they hadn't at home, and they missed their break time to do it. And actually that's going to sort of build a resistance against reading rather than wanting to do it. And I've put here as well that external rewards for amount of reads can become an incidental punishment. So there's children who can't read at home for whatever reason. They might not have books at home. They might not have a parent who's able to listen to them. And immediately, if we're getting reading records that need to be signed in order to get these rewards, then we're causing a disparity with children, and that is going to immediately switch them off reading, which I think for me, we're already losing at the first hurdle. So I think it's about building that culture and building that environment in a school which really wants, you know, makes children want to pick up a book. So the first way that I would say to do that is that all reading is encouraged, and there's no text type that is banned from the classroom. So I know people who follow me on Twitter will know I have an opinion on a certain celebrity author. I won't put them on my shelves. I won't own their books because I personally do not like them for several reasons. However, they're still not banned from my classroom. If a child wants to come in and that's what they enjoy reading, absolutely, you're reading, and I'm perfectly fine with that. And I think we should be encouraging children to read whatever works for them. But as a teacher, our responsibility then is to open up their vision, I suppose, of the range of books that are out there. So I do actually use in my classroom Scott's book match. So if they like the certain celebrity author, then they can have a look at other books which are similar. And again, because I read a lot myself, I'm able to recommend books like Sam Copeland and Jenny Pearson, who are really funny and have this, you know, a similar sort of genre to that book, but really allow them to start building in different authors, because it's the same as if you just take a child to McDonald's, they'll be eating, but it's not particularly healthy. So I think that's how we need to think of reading. Books discussions mean sharing likes and dislikes with children and allowing them to do the same. So if I don't like a book, I will say to them, I didn't enjoy it. However, I think you might do because of this. I personally don't enjoy books which have lots of referencing to gaming in, because I don't like reading it, but I will have them in my classroom. I will still read them, and I'll be able to say to children, you'll really like this because it has gaming in, and I know you're really interested in that. But I think it's so important that they also hear when we have dislikes as well. We can't be expected to like every book that we read, and children need to understand that. There's some that will sit there trying to slog through a book that they're really not enjoying because they think that that's what you do as an adult, or that's what their teachers do. And by telling them that it's okay not to like that book, then I think that's just as important. I think in a classroom, we need all types of books. So for me at the minute, my class are inhaling graphic novels. I've gone out and bought 3 more at the weekend. I'll have to do the same next week, and I'm sure, because they've just discovered them. They didn't realise that counted as reading, they told me. Of course it does. It's a gateway into other books. I've got Anne of Green Gables and Northern Nights being read in graphic novels, and it's a really great access point, particularly in schools with heavy EAL, where you can really get them into these classic books, expose them to vocabulary, but in a more simplistic for them way. Happy News, getting newspapers in, magazines have a place in the classroom. And also, I'm really lucky that I've had authors on Twitter send me, including Ross, who spoke earlier, foreign language versions of their books. So I can have children who, I've got a French child who speaks French in my class. He can read the same book as his friend who's reading it in English, and it's an identical book, and that really again builds that culture of reading. They can still have that book talk and discussion, even if they choose to read it in another language. I think banded books, they do have a place in some schools, and they do have a place within year groups. However, it can discourage reading for pleasure in upper years, and I think it's where we need to use them with caution. If a child is being told they have to read a certain band and all of their friends aren't, it can make them feel as though they're failing at reading, which again, we don't want to encourage. So if you do have to read banded books at school, I currently have to at my school, they all have banded books. I also let them choose one from my classroom library, and they can take their banded one home where they read it at home with their parents, but in school they get to read one of their choice in the classroom, and it really stops them from feeling as though it's a barrier for them or they're failing at it, because the last thing you want a child to feel like is they're failing at reading. We then also need to remember, and again, Scott touched on this, about books as a mirror. So they need to represent all children within the class and beyond. So it's a mirror that reflects back to them, not just their class, but actually the world around them. So this should include, but it's obviously not limited to, books that show different races, different sexualities and disability. I think there used to be a lot more stigma around children's books and what they should and shouldn't discuss. But there's no reason that anything a child is able to understand should be able to be in a book for them to read about, and they should be able to see their world in their books. So it's such an interesting pathway into conversation as well. There's so many books that you're able to have discussions about that actually you wouldn't just be able to bring up in normal conversation, but through a book you're able to have those discussions. And I did a really interesting project on it last year, which resources will be out soon that I've made as well, about SMSC, so social, moral, spiritual and cultural discussions that you can have through books. And it doesn't always have to be used as a learning tool. Sometimes it's just a tool that children can just enjoy discussing issues and topics. Again, we've started watching Newsround every day, and there's so many books that are relevant to what's going on in the news. So I've just read Breadwinner, which is a graphic novel about a child in Afghanistan, and we're able to bring that in and have a discussion about what's in the news through a book, which I think is fantastic. And finally, with this one, if they can't relate to a book, will they want to continue reading? So we can't relate to every book that we read. I wouldn't expect to pick up a book and relate to everything that's in there. However, if there's no books on the shelf that child can relate to in some way, they're probably not going to want to continue reading because they want to see themselves reflected in those books. So I've tried my hardest to have, as I said, the foreign language editions and also a range of different characters in order to promote that to the children as well. And this, any teacher that reads, any teacher that loves books, and any teacher that's in a classroom is going to want to talk about books in order to raise the profile of reading. So hopefully this isn't too simple for you all, because I'm sure you will do it. But children need to hear discussions about books being modelled, as well as accepting them as part of classroom life. So within my classroom, I always have book reviews that are available. So I've got a scrapbook that says Miss Weston's reviews, and I've written them in there. There's then the same book, but it's for the children to write their own in. The chance to tweet and chat to authors, I can't tell you what a difference that has made to my class. We were really lucky to have Sophie Dean, who's written the Agent Asher books, Zoom the class the other day, and she combined computing and reading, and it was just, she taught it in a way that we never could have, and it had such an impact on the children. As I said, discussing likes and dislikes and giving them a forum where they can do that, and recommendations given to the children. So I'm really lucky that I've always loved reading. I love reading as a teacher, but I'll admit now that when I first started teaching, I didn't read children's books. I read adult books, mainly crime. So I only even read one genre, but I started reading children's books and I realized that we're in a really brilliant age, like a golden age, really, I think, of children's literature. And there's so many brilliant books out there. We need to be able to read those and recommend them. There's books that I've recommended to a child based on what I've seen online, if I haven't had time to read that one yet, or if it's not in my library, because I use things like the Reader Teacher, and I've used Mr. Bod's roadmaps as well. So it's really important that those resources are out there, but it is important, I think, that as a teacher, you at least read a couple of children's books that you can give a really in-depth recommendation to your children with. And this needs to not be within just reading lessons. So it should be a leisure activity, not a lesson. So there's time, comfy reading is brilliant, where they just get to sit where they want in the classroom, where you just get to have a discussion, and you don't have to do it at set times during the day. It could be that all of a sudden you've had a discussion, as I said, around news round, and actually that turns into a discussion about books. And then, okay, take some time to read your books. Can you notice anything in there that you want to talk about? And they love just being able to sit there and read. It becomes part of routine as well. My class at the beginning of this year, some of them really loved reading, but most of them weren't that bothered. But now, any chance they get, they'll pick up a book. Some of them will come in after break and spend 3 minutes even just reading their book ready for the lesson to start, because they've learned how to find books that they love. And that's the most important thing, helping children find a book that they want to pick up, because every child will love reading if they're given the right tools to find the book that's for them. And then I think that's my last slide, because my last bit about reading not being a punishment, I think comes under everything else that I've been talking about. So it's really important that they see reading, as I've said here, as a leisure activity, as something they want to enjoy. And by just making your classroom a culture of reading, where they see you read as well. I sit and I always have my book on my desk. So I'm reading Binocular at the minute, and I've told them why I've picked it, because, you know, I love Halloween and it's autumnal weather outside. So I've picked this book. I've told them what's happening in it. It's got them excited. There's already children that want to borrow it after me. They see me reading all the time, and it's really modeled. It's just creating that classroom atmosphere of all the brilliant things that they can do. I've started my book of the week that children can read. On Twitter, there's someone called Cass HT, her handle is. She's done a reading question of each week. So that gives us a focus of discussion each week as well. But talking about books is really the most important thing that you can possibly do. It's just about really embedding that love of reading in children and that reading for pleasure in order to spread that across the curriculum. I feel like I've talked really, really fast as well. So hopefully all of that makes sense for all of you. But
you were absolutely amazing, Emily and Scott, both of you. It was fabulous, such a fabulous just chat from what am I trying to say? Just case studies to find, you know, things that you're actually doing in the classroom. So thank you so much.